25-year anniversary celebration. Then he handed her divorce papers instead of a gift. Grace prepared their silver anniversary perfectly, unaware her husband Brandon was plotting to destroy her life. In front of all the guests he declared, "25 years is enough. I need a young wife. Pack up and leave the apartment tomorrow." His mother-in-law smirked wickedly, thinking Grace would cry and beg. But Grace took the microphone, smiled coldly, and said words that made Brandon turn pale. She didn't just know about Brittany, his TWENTYYEAROLD mistress, but held evidence of his illegal business deals. When the truth exploded, Brandon realized his wife was no longer the naive girl he once knew. And before we continue, write in the comments from which country you're watching the video, and also check if you're subscribed to the channel, as I share interesting life stories with you every day. Okay, let's enjoy the story. The air was thick with anticipation of celebration. The city was preparing for autumn's arrival, but in the home of Brandon and Grace, a special atmosphere reigned, one of preparation for their silver wedding anniversary. 25 years together, a milestone that Brandon seemed especially eager to mark with grandeur. Grace, in turn, strove to match it. She personally oversaw every detail, from the choice of tablecloths to the menu composition. After all, this was their shared holiday, a symbol of their love, their family. Or at least, that's how it should have been. Grace stood by the window, watching the sun slowly set behind the horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. In the glass's reflection, she saw her own face, a woman of a certain age, yet retaining that spark, that thirst for life she believed Brandon had once loved in her. She adjusted her dress, dark blue, elegant, accentuating her figure. Brandon had always appreciated her taste, her ability to look impeccable. That afternoon, while sorting things in her husband's study, she stumbled upon an old box. Curiosity got the better of her, and she opened it. Inside wasn't old letters or photos as she expected, but a second phone new, the latest model. Her heart skipped a beat. A premonition of impending disaster stabbed deep inside. She turned it on, no password, and immediately, messages appeared. "Darling, I miss you so much. When will we see each other again? You're my life, my everything. I await our meeting like a breath of fresh air." The sender's name, Brittany. The photo, a young girl with long blonde hair and a provocative smile. Grace felt the world around her begin to crumble. 25 years. All those years she had believed in their love, their family, and he. She scrolled further through the chat. The messages grew more explicit, more intimate. She learned of secret meetings, expensive gifts, plans for the future, a future with no place for her, Grace. The world dimmed, her head buzzed. She closed her eyes, trying to steady the tremor in her hands. Betrayal. The word echoed in her mind. Betrayal by the closest person, the one she trusted most in the world. She recalled their wedding, their vows, their dreams. Everything had seemed so sincere, so real. Had it all been a lie? Had Brandon been pretending all these years? She opened her eyes. No, she wouldn't let herself break. She wouldn't cry or throw a fit. She wouldn't let him see her weakness. Instead, she'd use her wits, her composure, to strike back. She remembered her grandmother's words. A woman is strong, not through tears, but through wisdom. And now, more than ever, she felt those words were her only anchor. She turned off the phone and placed it back in the box. No one should know about her discovery. She'd play her role to the end, the loving wife who suspects nothing. That evening at dinner, Brandon was as courteous and attentive as ever. He talked about his business successes, new projects, future plans. Grace listened, smiled in response, asked questions, but inside, rage boiled, mixed with pain and disappointment. "You look beautiful today, darling," Brandon said, gently touching her hand. "Thank you, dear," Grace replied, trying to make her voice sound as natural as possible. "I do it for you." After dinner, when Brandon went to his study, Grace called her best friend, Natalie. "Natalie, I need your help," she said, struggling to keep the tremor from her voice. "I need to meet urgently." Natalie, always sensitive and responsive, immediately sensed something was wrong. "What happened, Grace? You're scaring me." "I'll tell you everything in person," Grace answered. "But it's very important." They agreed to meet the next morning at a cafe they both loved. Grace knew Natalie was the only person she could trust, the only one who would listen and help her make the right decision. In the morning, as dawn broke, Grace got up and headed to the bathroom. She washed her face with cold water to refresh it and chase away the remnants of sleep. She looked at her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes no longer held that naive trustfulness they once did. Now, they burned with fire, the fire of revenge. At the cafe, Natalie waited with worry in her eyes. She immediately noticed something was off with Grace. "What happened, Grace? Tell me," she exclaimed as Grace approached the table. Grace sat down, took a deep breath, and told Natalie everything. About the box, the phone, the messages. Natalie listened without interrupting, her face showing sympathy and anger. "The scoundrel!" she burst out when Grace finished. "I always knew he was slippery, but this... I don't know what to do, Natalie," Grace said, feeling tears welling up. "I'm in complete despair." "Don't you dare despair," Natalie said firmly. "You're a strong woman, Grace. You'll get through this." "We'll get through this." Natalie took Grace's hand and squeezed it. "First thing you need to do is see a lawyer," she said. "A good attorney who'll help protect your rights." Grace nodded. She knew Natalie was right. She needed legal help and fast. "I know a lawyer," Natalie said. "He's very experienced and reliable. I'll call him right now and set up a meeting." Natalie pulled out her phone and called. Luckily, he was available and agreed to meet that same day. After talking with Natalie, Grace felt a bit better. She no longer felt so alone and helpless. She knew she had support, a friend who would always be there. The meeting with attorney Robert Hayes took place in a businesslike and calm setting. Grace told him everything she knew about Brandon's finances, his connections, his possible schemes. Robert listened attentively, asked clarifying questions, made notes in his notebook. "In your case, we need to act quickly and decisively," he said when Grace finished. "We must gather all necessary evidence to protect your interests." Robert advised Grace not to file for divorce immediately but to wait until the anniversary. In his words, it would give them more time to prepare and collect information. "Let him think you know nothing," he said. "Let him relax and drop his guard while we prepare a surprise for him." Grace agreed with Robert's plan. She understood it was her only chance, a chance to avenge Brandon's betrayal and reclaim her life. She left Robert's office with a firm resolve to see it through. She was no longer the naive, trusting woman she had been. Now, she was a warrior ready to fight for her justice. She began gathering evidence of Brandon's infidelity and financial manipulations. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she was ready for anything. The day of the silver anniversary approached. Brandon was sure Grace suspected nothing. This confidence, fueled by years of her compliance and outward gentleness, intoxicated him. He saw her as just a beautiful accessory, a complement to his successful image, a woman who flawlessly ran the home, raised the children, and always supported his ambitions. He couldn't imagine the storm brewing behind her mask, ready to unleash at the most unexpected moment. He had long planned this anniversary as the perfect moment for liberation from a marriage that, in his view, shackled him, prevented him from breathing freely. With his young mistress Brittany, he felt rejuvenated, full of strength and energy. Brittany admired him, looked up to him unlike Grace, who in his opinion, had long stopped seeing him as a hero. Brandon decided to announce the divorce right at the celebration, in front of all the guests to humiliate Grace. In his twisted imagination, it seemed like a dramatic finale to their life together, a display of his power and independence. He already anticipated her confusion, tears, pleas for forgiveness. He was sure she wouldn't dare defy him, that she'd only manage pitiful excuses. Grace continued playing the role of the loving spouse. Only she and Natalie knew how hard it was. Every touch from him, every lying word made her nauseous, but she held on. She knew the key now was not to reveal herself, not to scare him off, to let him trap himself. The lawyer Natalie found proved a true professional. He quickly and precisely prepared all necessary documents, recorded Brandon's violations, gathered irrefutable evidence of his infidelity and financial schemes. Grace meticulously passed him new information, knowing her future depended on it. The guest list for the anniversary was huge. Brandon's business partners, influential officials, old friends, relatives. Brandon wanted to show everyone his success, his importance, his power. He didn't suspect the celebration would be his downfall. Evelyn, Grace's mother-in-law, anticipated exposing her daughter-in-law. She had never liked Grace, considering her unworthy of her son. She thought Grace married Brandon only for money, that she didn't truly love him. She dreamed of Brandon finding a more suitable woman from his circle, one who would bring even more benefits. On the anniversary day, Grace woke with a sense of anxiety. She knew today something pivotal would happen, dividing her life into before and after. She stood long before the mirror, examining her reflection. She saw a woman who had endured betrayal, pain, humiliation, but who hadn't broken, who found the strength to fight for her future. She donned the dress she chose herself, not one picked by her mother-in-law. It was elegant yet restrained, emphasizing her dignity and confidence. She applied makeup that hid traces of fatigue and highlighted her eyes, where determination burned. She left the house, leaving the past behind, and headed toward the future. She knew a tough day awaited, but she was ready. She was ready for war. On the way to the restaurant where the event was set, her lawyer called. He informed her all documents were ready, that he'd be at the celebration and prepared to provide any needed help. Grace thanked him and asked him to stay alert. When she entered the restaurant hall, a noisy crowd of guests greeted her, all in evening attire, smiling, congratulating her on the anniversary. Brandon stood at the entrance, greeting guests with Evelyn. He hugged Grace, kissed her cheek, and whispered, "You look stunning." Grace smiled back, but her eyes held no warmth. She knew this was the last time he'd say anything like that. The celebration began with congratulations, toasts, gifts. Grace accepted them with a smile, thanked the guests, pretended to be happy. Inside, a storm raged, but she skillfully hid it behind a mask of calm. Brandon was the center of attention. He felt like a triumphator. He accepted congratulations, joked, told anecdotes. He was sure of his impunity, his power. He didn't suspect his triumph would soon turn to total collapse. Evelyn didn't leave Brandon's side. She monitored his every move, controlled his words. She was pleased with how the event was going. She thought everything was following her plan. Grace watched them from afar, hatred growing in her heart. She saw their fake smiles, their hypocritical embraces. She knew it would all end soon. At the height of the silver wedding celebration, the restaurant hall drowning in flowers and lights buzzed with guests' conversations. Crystal chandeliers reflected the sparkle of jewels on the ladies and the sheen of expensive suits on the men. Nothing seemed to foretell the storm. Brandon, radiating self-assurance, rose from his seat. Glancing at Grace with feigned tenderness, he cleared his throat and drew the crowd's attention. "Dear friends," he began in his velvety voice, "today is a special day. For 25 years, Grace and I walked hand in hand, or at least, that's how it seemed to me." Silence fell over the hall. Grace sat motionless, her back perfectly straight, her face impassive. Only Natalie, standing just behind, saw how slightly her hands trembled, clutching her purse. Brandon continued, his tone growing bolder. "But life goes on, feelings change. I've realized I need freshness, youth, new horizons." He paused dramatically, scanning the hall. Many guests exchanged puzzled glances, sensing trouble. Evelyn sat with shoulders squared, a triumphant look on her face. She seemed to anticipate her daughter-in-law's humiliation, which, in her view, was long overdue. So Brandon held another pause, savoring the moment. We've decided to divorce." Dead silence enveloped the hall. Some guests gasped quietly. Grace didn't stir. "Grace," Brandon turned to her with fake pity. "I'll be honest, I need a young wife. Pack your things and leave. It'll be fair you'll get something." He smiled smugly, certain of his victory. He thought he controlled the situation, that Grace was broken and helpless. He didn't suspect the storm brewing in her soul. The guests waited silently for Grace's reaction. Evelyn was ready to gloat, but Grace calmly rose from her seat. Her gaze was cold and steady. She took the microphone Brandon had just set down. "Thank you, Brandon." Her voice was even and calm, contrasting his arrogance. "And thank you, dear guests, for sharing this momentous evening with us." She scanned the hall, a spark flashing in her eyes. "Indeed, today is a special day, the day I can finally set myself free." Whispers rippled through the hall. Brandon frowned, sensing something amiss. "Brandon, you said you need youth. That's your choice, but you erred thinking I'd suffer quietly in the corner. You erred thinking I know nothing." Grace took a deep breath and continued. "You said the apartment is yours?" "Amusing, but the apartment, like much else, is in my name. And by the way, yes, I filed for divorce a month ago. So dear, you're a bit late with your announcement." A gasp of astonishment swept the hall. Brandon's face began to redden. Evelyn's mouth fell open, speechless. Grace smiled faintly at the bewildered Brandon. "But that's not all. Since we're gathered here, I think you'll be interested to learn what my loving husband spent our company's money on." She nodded to Natalie, who approached with a folder. Grace took it and opened it. "Here." She raised one document. Bank statements confirming regular transfers to Brittany Thompson, that very young and fresh one my husband craves. Whispers raced through the hall. Some guests murmured. Others stared at Brandon in surprise. "And this." She pulled the next document. Bills from luxury boutiques, spas, and jewelers. All paid with the corporate card. "Not bad, right at our collective expense?" Brandon's face turned crimson. He tried to speak, but Grace gave him no chance. "But the most interesting," she paused, "isn't the mistress spending. It's several shady deals our firm was involved in, deals that, mildly put, aren't entirely legal." She looked straight into the eyes of some businessmen in the hall. They seemed to understand what she meant. "And of course," she added, "all these documents, including proof of infidelity and misuse of company funds, I've already handed to the authorities." She closed the folder and set it on the table, then turned to the guests. "I apologize for this spectacle. I hope you'll understand." Dead silence reigned in the hall. Brandon's partners, who had maintained feigned calm until now, exchanged nervous glances. They realized Grace's words weren't just an emotional outburst from a scorned wife, but a serious accusation with far-reaching consequences for their business and reputation. "Mr. Harold Jenkins," Brandon's longtime business partner whose company closely collaborated with Brandon's firm, couldn't hold back first. He rose abruptly, apologized to the others, and hastily left the hall without a word to Brandon. Several more followed. Their faces showed clear concern. The festive atmosphere dissolved completely, leaving only a taste of bitterness and fear. Evelyn, who until that moment had watched triumphantly as if witnessing a long-awaited victory, now sat thunderstruck. Her face twisted in fury and despair. She understood perfectly what this public scandal meant for her son. All her dreams of Brandon's advantageous marriage, his prosperity, and high status crumbled like a house of cards. She shot Grace a venomous glare full of hatred, but Grace didn't respond. In Grace's eyes, there was no triumph or gloating, only weariness and resolve. Brandon stood as if paralyzed. His face was pale as a sheet. Cold sweat beaded on his forehead. He tried to say something, to justify himself, but words stuck in his throat. He saw his world collapsing, his carefully built reputation turning to dust. He realized Grace had struck him at the heart, stripping him of everything he held dear. He was crushed, humiliated, utterly powerless. Grace looked at Brandon one last time. Her eyes held no pity or sympathy. She saw before her a once-loved man, a lying, vile traitor who deserved everything that happened. She felt no more pain or resentment, only emptiness and relief. She had done what she must, and now she could move forward. With her head held high, Grace headed for the exit. She walked confidently, without looking back. She felt freer than ever before. She had escaped the golden cage where she'd spent long years, ready now to start a new life. Natalie waited at the exit. She hugged Grace wordlessly. She knew words weren't needed now, only support. Together, they left the restaurant and headed to the car. Grace sat in the back seat and closed her eyes. She felt drained but happy. She knew difficulties lay ahead, but she was ready. She was strong, independent, and free. In the restaurant, only Brandon remained, standing amid the empty hall like a ghost. He was alone, abandoned by all. His mother, unable to bear the shame, had left the hall, cursing Grace and her family. His partners, fearing for their reputations, had fled hastily. His mistress, Brittany, terrified of the consequences, had vanished as if she'd never existed. Brandon was left alone with his shame and ruined life. He understood he'd lost everything: family, reputation, business, money. He was broken and crushed. He didn't know what to do next, how to live on. He was in despair. Outside, a light rain fell. Drops drummed on the car roof, as if counting down the final moments of his old life. Brandon looked out the window and saw Grace getting into the car and driving away. He realized she was gone forever. She had taken everything dear to him, leaving him in solitary ruin. In that moment, Brandon grasped the depth of his fall. He understood he'd made a colossal mistake by betraying Grace. He realized he'd lost not just a wife, but a loyal friend, a reliable partner, a loving woman. He understood he'd destroyed his own life with his own hands. He closed his eyes and wept. His cry was quiet and soundless, but it held so much pain and despair it could tear anyone's heart if anyone were there to hear. But no one was. He was alone. Brandon remained standing in the middle of the deserted hall, like a monument to his downfall. He was a symbol of shattered hopes, broken fates, and lost opportunities, a living example that betrayal and lies always boomerang back. Grace drove through the nighttime city, gazing at the big city's lights. She felt the heavy burden lifting from her shoulders. She knew a new life awaited, full of possibilities and prospects. Grace smiled. It was a smile of liberation, of hope, of new life. She knew everything would be fine. She believed in herself. The car carried her into the distance, toward a new life free of betrayal, lies, and pain, filled only with freedom, hope, and love. And Grace was ready for it. She awaited it with impatience and anticipation. She knew she deserved happiness, and she would surely find it. All right, thanks for listening.